Welcome back to our ongoing series, Meeting Jesus. We're taking a look at the Gospel according to Mark and getting to know what Jesus is all about and this movement called the Kingdom of God that he's bringing us into. We are sort of turning a corner in toward chapter 8 this week, and we ended at chapter 7 with Jesus making a deliberate change in direction to Gentile territory, outside the boundaries of Jewish territory, whether it was Judea or Galilee. And Jesus deliberately crossed into regions and places and towns where people who aren't Jewish will be. And last week we had this really interesting story where Jesus met this woman who Mark says is Syrophoenician. She's from the city of Tyre. This is on the coast of the Mediterranean. Definitely not Jewish, and Mark has given us her ancestry. And Jesus is astounded. She has a faith unlike what Jesus has seen back in his own region among his own people. And by that moment, it seems like Jesus is clear. This thing that he has come to bring, this thing we sometimes call the kingdom of God, the reign of God, this is going to be for everybody. Jewish people, to be sure, but also non-Jewish people, Gentile people. And now we're going to see in chapter 8, Jesus makes a deliberate move to recreate, to do again the kinds of things he had done back for his own people, for this wider circle of people, almost as if sort of embodying for them this rippling out movement that what he's come to do isn't just for Judeans, isn't just for people of ancient Israel's story, but now is going to be opened up to everybody. And the first scene we get in Mark chapter 8 might feel like a rerun. In fact, it might feel like a disappointing rerun, because we get a story where Jesus feeds this crowd of people with just a few loaves of fish, a few loaves of bread and a couple of fish. And it feels like we've been here. We had a story like this before, and it was 5,000 people before, and Jesus fed those 5,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 fish, and now Jesus has more bread and fish to work with, and he only feeds 4,000 people, and there's only 7 baskets of leftovers. It feels a little bit like, what's going on here, Jesus? Why would we get 2 stories that are so similar, and why would we get this lesser one feeling like, it feels like an afterthought? It feels like it's not quite as good as the first one. Doesn't Mark know? In good storytelling, you build up, and the spectacle gets bigger and bigger. Except I think what Mark wants us to hear is that there's this echoing almost, that what Jesus did for people in his own group, the Judean community, when he would feed people who were from his own Jewish ancestry, that now he's doing this for people beyond that he's making it clear that he's there to offer the reign of God, the abundance, the well-being, the goodness of life, not just for people like him, but that anybody's going to be welcome into this new thing that God is doing. It's a deliberate move on Mark's part. It's not a rerun. It's not that Mark is looking to fill up some space or pad out his gospel. I'll just retread some stuff I told before. But Mark is convinced this is another episode, another event where Jesus does something similar, but the similarity is meant to say, look, what I did for those people, I'm doing for this other group of people as well. This is a really, really important move, because we're going to continue to see how Jesus' movement widens and is increasingly inclusive of outsiders and people beyond the boundaries. Jesus is going to stay for most of this chapter up far north, some of it in Gentile territory, some just sort of around the northern edge of Galilee, but there's always in the back of the context, always in the background, this awareness of being out in foreign space where Jesus and his disciples are the other. And it's that setting too that makes sense of where Jesus has this really famous conversation, this important conversation with his disciples late in chapter 8. Mark tells us he's in the villages around Caesarea Philippi, which is way north, back, up toward modern-day Syria, in that direction, far north from Israel and far north of Galilee. And it's a Gentile city. It was founded by the empire, named for Caesar, Caesarea, and Philip of Macedon, and Philip of the Herodian dynasty. And so here's this city that's got this Greco-Roman culture and context, and Jesus there sort of takes time away from his own community with his disciples, and he asks them, what do you hear other people say about me? What do other people say about me? and they respond what they've heard from other people. Some people say that you're like one of the prophets. Some people say that you're like Elijah. Some people think that you're like John the Baptizer all over again. We've heard that before in Mark's gospel. And then Jesus turns it and says to his disciples, okay, who do you say that I am? And Simon Peter blurts out, you're the Messiah. Now, in a sense, this is what everything has been building toward in Mark's gospel, right? We saw from the very, very beginning, the opening words of Mark's gospel, his little narration at the beginning. This is the good news of Jesus, the Messiah, the Christ, the Son of God. And then we've noticed a couple of people along the way give clear descriptions of Jesus as God's Son, as the Holy One of God, the Messiah, that kind of thing. It's God's own voice at Jesus' baptism. The unclean spirits and demonic forces recognize Jesus and obey his authority. The creation itself, the wind and the waves, obey Jesus in a way that only God seems to have that power in the rest of the Hebrew Scriptures. So we've gotten clue after clue after clue. Jesus' real identity, God's own Son, God's chosen one, the Messiah. And finally, one of his own disciples recognizes it and says it. And the moment after he says it, Jesus says, now don't tell anybody that. He doesn't say no, but he says, now don't tell anybody that. And because from this moment on, Jesus is going to have to get his disciples to sort of unlearn what they thought they knew about being the Messiah and now give this new picture of what it looks like. Jesus immediately is going to tell them that being the Messiah is going to take him to the way of the cross, to laying down his life, not to killing his enemies, but to laying down his life for them. Not to crucifying his opponents, but to being crucified by them, and that this will not be a mistake or an accident, but this is exactly God's way of saving and redeeming. God's reign looks like suffering love, not like conquest. And up against the backdrop of a Roman city built to sort of flex the empire's muscle, named for Caesar, sort of here's this reminder that Jesus' way butts up against the way of Caesar. And interestingly, when Matthew tells this story, and Matthew has Peter blurt out, you're the Messiah, Jesus' response is just a little bit different. When Matthew tells it, Matthew adds, Jesus says back to Simon, blessed are you, Simon, son of John, for flesh and blood hasn't revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven has revealed this to you. And I tell you, you're Peter, and on this rock I'll build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. It's this triumphalistic sound of even there in Caesarea Philippi, this Roman stronghold, even there, God's power won't be defeated even by the power of the empire. And Mark doesn't deny that in his telling, but it's certainly not framed in such loud triumphalistic language. It's more like Mark knows that so many people have Jesus' original followers, and maybe the people who are reading his gospel picture, God must come in like a general leading an army, destroying and smashing his enemies. And Jesus has come to do something very different. Jesus' way of reigning, Jesus' way of saving, Jesus' way of being God's Messiah isn't to be a king who conquers or a general who commands and invades only for the sake of his own people. But Jesus has come to lay his life down in this new way that includes Jewish people, Gentile people, insiders, outsiders. It's an upside down kind of a kingdom, right? In the ancient world, the ways you define a kingdom are, we're one particular kind of group with one culture, one religion, one way of life. This is our customs, this is our language, this is what we do, and we attack or invade other people for the benefit of our homeland, right? We conquer, we fight them off for the good of our homeland. Jesus has instead brought a different kind of kingdom where you're not conquering anybody. You're laying down your life even for enemies and outsiders, and creating a new kind of community where outsiders are welcomed in, where Jesus goes out deliberately to be present among outsiders, Gentiles, the people who are outcasts. And while at first it might have just been the outcasts like the tax collectors in Judaism, in Judea or Galilee, now Jesus has clearly moved further beyond to include people further out. It's about a story that reaches out far and wide, and that's the amazing good news of what Jesus is all about. That's where the story takes us in chapter 8, and we hope you'll join us either in person for our gatherings and conversations at 1 o'clock on Thursday afternoons as we do our Meeting Jesus Gospel of Mark Bible study, or continue to catch up with us here in our online summaries. We hope you can keep joining us here as we keep meeting Jesus. See you next time.